name is Melanie Nevis.
And I'm Tegan Aline.
And we're continuing our discussion on fairy tales, folklore, fantastical, whatever you want to call it.
Season 6.
And yeah. And I did research on a couple of different things for this one. And then my laptop battery died. And so I forgot what I was supposed to be doing the research on.
Yeah, heads up. Nobody tells you how fun, in brackets, not fun, it is to start a podcast without the right equipment. Don't let anybody convince you that like absolutely you can do it without like the right equipment. But if you have equipment that is good, really that's works and is like, I'm speaking on my end because I have to use my husband's computer because my MacBook Air is so slow. It's so old that it doesn't have enough RAM in it to hold a freaking podcast. So I've had so many issues with that, so many issues with my mic. You've had issues with your battery. Like, we have the equipment we
I just
have.
need
We're
a new
making it work.
battery.
But if anybody wanted to
Yeah.
sponsor us and give us recording equipment, sure, it would make us sound fancier. Who cares? At this point, I'm just going to ask. You know, you never know unless you ask.
So funny. Fair enough. Fair enough.
Anyone out there? It's like, I see potential. If only you can't see this right now, you guys, but I literally have a sock over my mic to kind of like dial back how echoey it is in my house. And I don't know that it's always working. Okay, well, I'm glad it works. But,
enough. It works enough.
But you know,
But yeah,
I could stand to upgrade. I'm just saying. Anyway,
I did some research on Mulan, which was turning out to be really interesting. And then I had to bring in my laptop battery and I didn't want to redo the research. So I decided to go
Fair
somewhere
enough.
a little bit different. I'm not going to talk about a specific fairy tale. I'm going to talk about nursery rhymes instead.
That's a
that
big
many of us
turn from
heard.
Mulan, but yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it was like I was also being like, well, maybe Alice in Wonderland, but that has like hints of pedophilia, and we kind of already potentially
We're
hit
kind
that.
of tired with that. Like, we're gonna get Alice in Wonderland at some point,
Not
maybe in a different season.
not really interested.
Yeah.
So
Me neither. Yeah.
I'm gonna do some Mother Goose rhymes because Mother Goose
We know
has
those.
some ulterior. Yeah, there are like really ulterior social and political agendas that are very cleverly masked
What?
in the guise of playful nursery rhymes.
Seriously? I didn't know that. I know a little bit. I don't even know if it's a part of Mother Goose, but I know that the London Bridge song is something like that. So I'm guessing it's something similar. But I had no
A
idea.
lot of them are. A
Wow.
lot of them are.
Fascinating.
So I want to review a couple of popular ones while providing some historical context for them.
Yay.
But
I love historical context.
love historical context, right?
I freaking do. Yeah.
So the first question, and I don't it's not a super important question, but like, who was Mother Goose? Do you think that she was real or was she fictional?
Straight up, all I know is I had the Mother Goose nursery rhyme. There was a goose on the cover that had a bonnet on her head, and that's who I always thought Mother Goose was.
Perfect.
Oh, is that right?
Well, okay. So the truth behind the identity
I thought you were going to be like, no, that's not it at all.
I mean, like, the truth behind the identity of this friendly woman whose nursery rhymes are very charming and have charmed children for generations will never truly be known. Some believe that Mother Goose dates back to the 10th century French court.
Oh, good grief.
There is a legend that the wife of King Robert II, whose name was Bertha of Burgundy, was known as Queen Goosefoot, and she was a really great storyteller.
Oh, so interesting. Wow.
Yeah. Another popular theory is that Mother Goose was a 17th century woman from Boston named either Elizabeth Foster Goose or Mary Goose, who entertained her grandchildren with rhymes. And according to this theory, Goose's son-in-law, who was a publisher, collected her rhymes and then published them as a book. That one doesn't really make sense because, our good old friend Charles Perrault,
Oh man.
he was actually the first person to publish a Mother Goose collection of rhymes and folktales in 1697,
Of course he
which
was.
essentially kind of
Man.
initiated this fairy tale genre in the popular form that we know it today.
Yeah, he really did a lot for this. He was a busy dude.
Yeah.
He
Yeah,
was a
and
busy
the
dude.
collection gained popularity all over France, and by 1729 it was translated into English, and it was only brought over to the
Mm.
US in 1786, but it was brought over to the US before this like theory of some Boston woman came to be.
Okay. She just had real life Mother Goose vibes, probably, and
Yeah, I think
knew
so.
some good stories,
I
maybe.
think so. And then there's a lot of people who believe that she was never a real person and was just a character that began to appear in French fairy tales and nursery rhymes in the like 1620s and 30s,
Like,
which
who
is
did
a
I
very
just
probable
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
it's a very probable reality. At
Yeah,
the end of the day, it doesn't really matter that much because the stories have left their mark on children's literature, and they're still
facts.
heard in schoolyards and playgrounds to this day.
Yeah,
Like a lot of the same ones that we heard growing up, and some of them, the wording changes, and we'll go into one in particular where the wording has changed a lot. But today, all of the poems, when I read them out, or like rhymes when I read them out, they are taken from a free ebook of Mother Goose stories, The Real Mother Goose, which is available online. Uh, you literally just have to type in Gutenberg ebook Mother Goose and it'll
oh, you
come up.
said
And
free
like,
ebook.
yeah.
Oh, I thought you said 3 ebook, and I was like, "What's
Oh,
that?" Just because I've
no, no.
noticed that when I've been doing research on these stories, I've noticed that scholars actually classify them with, like, letters and numbers, like, the types of stories,
Oh,
and I
yeah.
was thinking about it because I was gonna ask you at some point, like, when you studied this kind of thing in university, if you came across that and what that is, but anyways, so never mind, doesn't
Well,
matter, but
I study more so like history books, less like folklore.
Okay.
And so I didn't have to deal with the different versions of like folkloric stories that
Mhm.
exist. It was very much history, like primary source history texts,
Ah, I
historical
see.
texts and things like that I studied. So
Cool.
it wouldn't have been numbered in that way, I don't think.
Yeah, it seems like they have type prototypes of stories that they
Mhm.
classify in a certain
Which
way.
makes
Like
sense.
what we were
Yeah.
talking about in Rapunzel, there's like a group of stories that have this theme. This
Mhm.
is like an A27. I don't know. I'm making that up, but like something like that. It's like the
Yeah.
A27 classification of stories or something, you know.
Yeah.
Anyways, I digress. I digress.
But
Sorry.
yeah, so if you are interested in just finding the entire, and it's a massive catalog. I don't think I realized how many rhymes exist in this Mother Goose world. It's crazy. It's a massive catalog. It's available online
Really?
for
Eh?
free. Yeah, Gutenberg, Mother Goose. You'll find it there in a document.
I
So,
do remember having this book as a kid and it was hefty. It was a big one.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
hefty.
For
But let's
rhymes, I
begin
mean, yeah,
with
yeah.
Ba Ba Black Sheep. So we know
Oh,
this one,
that's
right? Ba
yeah.
ba black
Black
sheep, have you any wool? Yes, Mary, have I 3 bags full. One for my master, one for my dame, but none for the little boy who cries in the lane.
okay. Yeah,
So slightly
pretty
different
much different.
wording potentially
Yeah, but
than
basically the same thing.
what
Yeah,
basically the same, but slightly different wording. So we're looking at like the version that I have has a more traditional wording to it.
cool.
And there are two possible meanings and origins for this rhyme. The most common theory relates to the partitioning of wool, and that is to say that the heavy taxation on wool inspired this rhyme in the 13th century. So she old.
Oh, okay, so what was going on with wool in the 13th century?
The medieval English wool trade was one of the most important factors in medieval English economy.
Oh,
And the trade's
damn.
liveliest period was from 1250 to 1350. And this was an era when trade in wool had been the backbone and the driving force of the English economy.
That is
And
wild.
when Edward
Mhm.
the First returned from his crusading in 1272, he essentially imposed new taxes on wool to fund his military campaigns. And this wool tax is said to be the basis of the rhyme.
Interesting.
So 1/3 of each sack must go to the king, the master,
Oh,
one
okay.
third to the church or to the monasteries. That's the dame. And then none to the actual shepherd, the little boy who cries down the lane. So
Okay.
it's not a gentle song about sharing things out fairly. It's actually a bit of a bitter reflection on how brutal life was for the working classes.
Yeah, and you know what? In the research that I did for one of the other podcasts in this series, Hansel and Gretel, um,
Hmm.
I was reading about the Great Famine that happened from 1315 to 1317, 1320. But it
Yeah.
sounds like those, and that was kind of happening in all parts of Europe. So,
Hmm.
but it's interesting because we actually lived through something similar when we went through COVID. We saw like we had such a desperate time where everything was all the commodities, like everything, people were buying things off the shelves, everything was going really fast, people were worried, people were struggling, and then immediately during the process of COVID and afterwards we saw huge inflations on things and taxations for things, and
Yeah. We're still seeing it, right?
yeah,
We're
oh
still
yeah.
seeing the effects of it.
Who am I kidding? Yes, we absolutely are. But that's really interesting. Crazy cool. I had
Yeah.
no idea that's what that was about.
Yeah. So that is the most likely theory. The second meaning, and this might have come around a little bit later, where we inevitably impose modern reflections on things of the past. That's not to say that this isn't true
Mm,
at all, but
yeah.
the second meaning relates to the use of the color black and the word master. And
Oh,
this has
okay.
led some to wonder whether it's actually a racial message at its center instead. Um, and its political correctness, let's say, was called into question in the later part of the 20th century.
Okay.
And some schools actually ended up banning it from being repeated in classrooms. And others would just
Yeah.
switch out the word black for something less offensive. So in 2011, I believe, the BBC reported on a nursery in the UK that had switched it to Baba Rainbow Sheep as an alternative. Or like
I wish rainbow sheep were
they'll like
real.
yeah,
That'd
yeah,
be
right.
cool.
Or they'll just like use another color or um another another
Right.
descriptor of some sort
Yeah.
in order to continue singing it.
Interesting.
So I don't know that second meaning is a more modern meaning. That's not to say that it's not the original, but it
No, I kind
it
of get the
does have
vibe,
like a
especially
modern
like
yeah.
yes sir, yes sir. Like yeah, I kind of get the vibe on. I get where they're coming
Yeah,
from on that. Yeah.
I totally get where it's coming from. The most common theory does relate to the taxation of wool because that really was crippling for a lot of people, and
Mhm.
it's an old rhyme that was inspired like in the 13th century once this tax actually came into being.
Right. Okay.
So
That makes
timelines.
sense.
So
That makes sense.
that's
Some of these nursery rhymes sound a lot like songs that a drunk man at a bar would make. Or, sorry, correction, songs that a drunk man at a pub would make. You know what I mean?
yeah,
So
yeah,
that tracks. I feel like that tracks.
yeah. Um, that the next nursery rhyme is originally titled "Ring a Ring a Roses,"
Oh,
and
okay.
so there's two different wordings for this. So I grew up with "Ring Around the Rosie," "A Pocket Full of Posies," "Hasha Hasha, We All Fall Down." I've also heard "Ashes Ashes, We All Fall
Yeah,
Down."
that's the one I knew. Yeah.
The original "Ring a Roses, A Pocket Full of Posies, Tisha Tisha, We All Fall Down."
Who's Tisha?
And so after grade 6, like very shortly after grade 6, I had learned that this rhyme was about the Black Death, right? Bubonic
Right.
plague that swept England in the 14th and 17th centuries.
Right.
And the rosies were the red marks of the bubonic plague, and
Mhm.
posies were the flowers that the plague doctors would use to minimize this stench of death that just pervade the air.
Oh boy.
And the ashes were supposed to represent cremated bodies of those who died from the plague, and the falling down meant you fall down dead.
It is so twisted that these are nursery rhymes. Like I know we come from a society that actually differentiates between children, teenagers, young adults, adults. But I know that that wasn't historically always the case. And I
Mhm,
know that like, like back in these eras, they would have like children working in like, like we've all seen Annie. We know we've all seen Les Mis. We know like that vibe existed of the
mhm.
workhouses and all of that stuff, but it's just wild to think that kids were playing. Hell, even I played. Did you ever play Ring Around the Rosie like when you were
Yeah.
little?
Yeah, of course.
You just all go hold hands and dance around in a circle, and then when it says
Yeah.
ashes, ashes, we all fall down. Then you all fall down in the grass and you giggle. That's messed up.
It is
Wow.
really messed up, but here's the thing. So this is like I thought I heard about this very shortly after grade 6, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, it's about the Black Death." And so I've had that in my brain for like my entire life. And
Okay.
upon doing more research,
Uh huh.
here's the thing. The first mention of Ring Around the Rosie uh, and the plague comes in the middle of the 20th century. That's like 700 years after the bubonic plague.
Oh.
The origins of the song actually they seem to be in Germany in the late 18th century. Other
Mm.
versions are also found in Switzerland and Italy. Ring Around the Rosie doesn't actually arrive on British shores until the 1880s, as
Mm.
far as historians can tell. And England's last brush with bubonic plague was in the Middle Ages in like 1665, so more than 200 years prior.
So
So,
what's
like,
it
the
about?
timeline in itself
Doesn't match.
doesn't match up.
Yeah.
And then what about the ashes? Well, remember, the original words are not ashes, ashes. It's
There's
tisha,
Tisha,
tisha, which
Tisha.
has nothing to do with cremating bodies. And husher, husher has also been
Right.
used because in 14th century England,
Uh-huh.
this is a fact, it was absolutely forbidden to cremate the dead. So even those who died of the bubonic plague were buried in accordance with church law.
Oh, no, mass
So they
graves.
would not have been cremated.
Oh,
So this
right.
concept of ashes, ashes is not factually correct. The plague theory doesn't
Oh.
fit.
Oh, wow. Fascinating.
Another theory that does fit
Mhm.
actually has to do with love.
Oh, okay, okay.
And
Wow,
I did
twist.
not think, yeah, I did not think that in my head, Ring Around the Rosie, where I was just like, oh my goodness, this has to do with the Black Death. And like,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So
the
dark.
husha husha is the sound of people throwing up before they die, or ashes, ashes is like burning bodies. No, none of this fits. Uh,
What?
a theory that does fit is that it may actually have to do with love. In the 19th century in England and America, there was a Protestant dancing band. Think of it kind of like a Footloose vibe. Okay.
So there was no dancing allowed, and then Kevin Bacon came in with Ring Around the Rosie.
Yeah, exactly. Think of it as like early Footloose. Um, Not being able to dance, young teenagers would have what they called play parties, where they would sing little rhymes in a circle while they moved around. So it was like dancing, but it was not technically dancing. So they'd be like,
Because
"We're
they were
just
in
in
a
a circle.
circle.
We're just
Okay.
moving in a circle." But it was
Okay.
kind of a dance. It was kind of a
Yeah,
dance. And
yeah.
songs like Ring a Ring a Roses were about courtship and crushes. So someone stood in the middle of the ring as the rosy or the rose bush, which symbolizes love.
Okay.
And then they like move around them to defy these dancing bands.
Ring Around the
And so yeah, it's all
Rosie.
about being able to mix and mingle.
Yeah,
courtship and
because
crushes.
also aren't posies kind of like the old-fashioned flower? Like you would hear something in a story like a guy would bring posies to like a girl that he loves or that he has a crush on or something
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah.
Uh,
And so that's the young teenagers are doing this, and then
mhm,
their younger siblings are there and they would kind of imitate them. And
mm,
so even though these play parties fell out of fashion, the little kids kept up this tradition of singing songs in circles. And so a lot
right.
of these nursery rhymes on a schoolyard are sung in circles, right? And you like
Mhm.
go in a circle. But it kind of started with these play parties and this Protestant dancing ban
That's wild.
so
That's so
that
wild. And
genders
so
didn't mix and mingle.
what about the Tisha part? Do you know what that means or what that stood for, or do you have any?
No, that I was having a hard time finding it, but it's not it has nothing to do with cremating bodies. Like Tisha, I'm not entirely sure. I was having a hard time with it. But
Mm.
everything else seems to actually be more related to
That's
love.
so funny because I think when you're a kid and you hear Ring Around the Rosie, when you first hear it as a kid, I think you kind of think of it as a sweet thing. And then you
Mhm.
get disillusioned when you're older just to
Yeah.
find out that that's probably not true. That's so
Yeah.
crazy.
May have been
Ah,
right all along.
and that it
I know,
was
isn't that
actually
so
a sweet
interesting?
thing. Oh my gosh,
Yeah.
that's why I didn't expect it to go that way.
I know.
Mm,
So fun little things.
interesting.
The next two are Three Blind Mice and Mary, Mary, Quite Contrary.
Oh my gosh, I know all of these. Well, like kind of. I must have.
Okay, so Three Blind Mice. We know Three Blind Mice. See how they run? Well, the original doesn't say it twice, but Three Blind Mice. See how they run? They all ran after the farmer's wife who cut off the tails with a carving knife. Did you ever see such a thing in your life as three blind mice?
Yeah.
This is based on Mary First, also known as Bloody Mary.
No way. What? Get out
She
of
was
here.
the daughter of Catherine of Aragon and King Henry VIII.
Do we know
And
who Catherine
Mary,
the heir of Aragon is? Do you know who she is? She was a queen of Spain. So there's actually a whole series that they did recently about Catherine. First of all, I think Aragon is cool because we have it in Lord of the Rings, and
well, we have Aragorn.
or oh, maybe I was pronouncing it wrong. Okay. I always thought it was Aragon. But I feel like it's very close. And we know that he took like a lot of stuff from real life or from
Yeah.
places around Europe. So I always thought that was really neat. And I was really blown away to find out that Aragon's just like on the other side of actually of here where I live. But
Ah.
Catherine was King. I watched a whole series on this and it was very interesting. She was King Henry VIII's first wife. So
Yes.
kind of his marriage to her.
I'm
Oh, sorry. Am I jumping into it?
no, it's okay.
I don't want to.
I was gonna go into it, but
Okay.
no,
No,
it's
no,
true.
no.
Like,
You do it. You do it. You do it. I'm obsessed
well,
with
I
this
was
story right now recently. So
yeah. So I forgot the bit that she's originally a Spanish queen.
she's a
Um,
princess. She's a Spanish princess.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
She becomes Queen of England and Ireland in the 16th century,
Hmm.
and she is Catholic. And yes, she is King Henry VIII's first wife, and that's important with Mary, Mary, quite contrary. Um, so during her reign, the Queen's belief in Catholicism fueled persecution against the Protestants. During Queen Mary the First's
Hmm.
reign,
Oh, during Queen
it
Mary's
fueled her
reign.
persecution. Yeah. So it is believed that the farmer's wife mentioned in Three Blind Mice is a reference to Mary the First. Now, again, during Mary's reign, there were loyal Protestant believers who refused to renounce their faith despite the
Yeah.
consequences.
Yeah.
And three of them in particular, I think there were three bishops, they became known as the Oxford Martyrs. Yeah, and they were Protestant bishops who stood by their beliefs and allegedly conspired to dethrone Mary and bring back Protestantism as the main religion. Their efforts were
Oh, that's so
successful.
interesting.
and they were accused of heresy.
Mhm.
And the blind belief in Protestantism that the three bishops had represented by the three blind mice in the nursery rails in the nursery rhyme who get their tails cut off. Because a lot of people thought that the three blind mice were the bishops specifically.
Yeah.
I think it's more like it's their beliefs
Mhm.
that the mice represent, but not the bishops themselves. In
Oh,
reality,
maybe.
like the bishops were not dismembered in any way.
Mhm.
uh, all people who were punished for heresy at this point, they were burned at the stake. They were not chopped up or beheaded or anything like that.
That's so interesting. I did not know that there was a call back to Catholicism after Henry VIII. I had no idea that that happened.
Yeah, for a really quick blip,
I was gonna
and
say,
I'll go into it a little bit more.
okay,
So that kind of takes us to Mary, Mary, quite contrary.
okay,
Mary, Mary, quite contrary. How does your garden grow? Silver bells and cockle shells, and pretty maids all of a row.
yeah,
And again, so the historical interpretation identifies Mary as Mary I of England, who ruled from 1553 to 1558. And
very short.
in
Okay,
this case, very, very short, the garden is said to refer to her lack of heirs.
okay,
Other phrases, such as quite contrary, could speak to her attempts to unsuccessfully effect change. And the pretty
mm,
maids could refer to her miscarriages. The silver bells and cockleshells could refer to her torture devices. So, Mary the First was and is remembered in history as Bloody Mary. And if we were to take this meaning, that means that this rhyme is a metaphor for Queen Mary's torture and execution of Protestants.
I had no
If that's the
idea.
case,
It explains a
her,
lot, though. It explains a lot.
yeah, right? Her motivations originate with her father, King Henry VIII, and his break with the Catholic Church and his creation of the Church of England. So again,
And do we know?
Mary
Are
is,
we going to talk about why he created the Church of England?
yeah,
Okay,
so
okay.
Mary is the only surviving child of Henry VIII and his first wife, like I mentioned, Catherine of Aragon. And he really wanted a male heir so badly
Psychopathically.
that he basically poo-pooed the Pope and split from the Catholic Church. Yeah, he wanted a male heir, and his first wife was unable to produce a male heir. So he split from the Catholic Church and declared that only England's king could head its church.
Hmm.
Hence, like you have the rise of Protestants. And it was a power move. It was a power move that allowed him to continue remarrying, betraying, and
Yeah.
murdering his wives until he got the male heir that he so desperately wanted. And King Henry VIII is like most well known for this, I think, for the fact
Yeah.
that he beheaded a bunch of his wives.
In fact, Catherine's one of the only ones he didn't kill because he actually like
Hmm.
in yeah, when he married her, it was supposed to be to unify him with the Catholic Church, and she was like a hardcore Catholic. Being
Yeah.
Spanish, like that's no surprise. But then like you said, he couldn't get he was obsessed with having a male heir. It was kind of like in the lineage at that time, that's what they were supposed to have
Hmm.
was male heirs. And we've heard that story all over the place, and it kind of comes from that. But yes, he devised a way that he could legally
Hmm.
divorce Catherine by
Yes.
creating his own church, which I think is double hilarious. Like if you look at like the current situation with the royals, who are also the Protestant head of the Protestant church, because they
Yeah.
like there is such drama around divorce, but he essentially created divorce, which I think is quite
Yeah.
wild. And she's actually lucky in a way because like you said,
Because,
everyone else he just
yeah, he
yeah.
just cut off their heads, right?
Yeah.
So
Hmm.
Mary ascended to the throne in 1553 after Henry's only male heir, Edward, died. And Edward and Mary didn't really like each other.
Do you know
Um,
who gave him Edward? I think, was it his last wife?
uh,
I don't know. I'm just wondering out of curiosity.
Jane Seymour.
Was that his last? I don't know. I heard that he particularly liked his last wife quite a lot. I think
Yeah,
that was
Jane
her.
Jane Seymour. I don't remember if it was his last. Like, I don't know if it was his last wife or not.
Okay.
He had so many.
He did.
His third queen, Jane, gave him a
Oh,
male
maybe
heir.
not. Maybe not his last. Okay,
No,
anyways,
it wouldn't be his
digression.
last wife. But anyways,
Edward died, and Mary and Edward
Edward
remarried
died. Like, he
each
took
other.
the throne after Henry, and then he died, and then there was no one else. So Mary came to the throne. And
Mm,
during her 5-year reign, she really tried to undo her father's deeds.
yeah.
So she undid her parents' divorce.
Oh, wow. I didn't know
She
that.
was hell bent on reestablishing Catholicism. So she began persecuting Protestants, and
Oh,
more than
wow.
300 Protestants were burned at the stake,
Oh my
which
gosh.
again was the fate of all convicted heretics back then.
Right, right, right.
And in that sense, Mary wasn't especially bloody. Like, she never actually drew blood per se,
Yeah.
right? Like, she didn't behead anyone. Um, the kind of ironic thing is that after her death in 1558, she was succeeded by the very, very Protestant Elizabeth the
I was
First.
just gonna say, did Elizabeth the First take over after her? Who
Yeah,
was the daughter? I didn't know this until I watched this whole thing, but she was actually the daughter of King Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn. I didn't know that's why
yeah,
Anne Boleyn was such a big deal. She's also one of the first
yeah,
ones to get her head cut off. I think she is the first one to
yeah,
get her head cut off.
yeah,
Wild.
yeah.
Wild. That shit's crazy.
And Queen Elizabeth's stint as the queen, she was
Lasted.
kind of like,
It-
she hired this so-called Protestant martyrologist, I guess
yeah.
you can call him that, named John Fox, who wrote a
Mm,
book of martyrs, which provided everyone with a very bloodthirsty image of Mary. And that's kind of how she became known as Bloody Mary.
she kind of had to do it,
But
I guess, in a way.
well, the interesting thing, we know that King Henry VIII was kind of crazy anyways.
Mm,
Mary killed 300 Protestants, right? She had
mhm.
them burned for heresy. But her time, or like her reign, was very far from being the bloodiest. Her father had more than
Sure. I'm sure.
57,000 people executed over even
Yeah.
the slightest indications that they were traitors to
Yeah. He
England
was
or the
paranoid,
crown.
right? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, super paranoid. So
Mm,
that is Mary Mary quite contrary. There's another like two interpretations that are kind of connected to this.
okay.
One connects the rhyme to Mary Queen of Scots, who ruled Scotland from 1542 until
And isn't
1567.
is she like the cousin of Elizabeth the First, I think?
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's a big controversy around that because a lot of people think actually she should have gotten the throne, not Elizabeth, right? This period of British history is freaking dark and fascinating. It's the Tudors into the Elizabethan age. And if you've ever watched Shakespeare in Love or anything, you know who Queen Elizabeth the First was because she's like the most famous queen in
Well, you
like
could just watch
their
The
history.
Tudors, and like
Oh yeah.
it kind of covers this really in depth. Um, But yes, some have suggested that the second line, if we're talking about Mary, Queen of Scots, how does your garden grow, is in reference to the lands that she reigned over. Silver
Mm,
bells could be connected to cathedral bells, and cockle shells to her unfaithful husband. And the
mm,
pretty maids all in a row could be speaking about her ladies in waiting. And
interesting.
another interpretation is that it relates to Mary, mother of Jesus. And in
Okay.
this Catholic reading of the text, the bells are the altar bells that you see in
Mm.
church, like with the altar boys ringing the bells. And the cockle shells could be badges worn by pilgrims to a particular shrine.
Oh, they're so
And the
cockle
pretty,
shells are like the cookie Saint Jacques, like the ones which they have
yeah,
all yeah, people actually still wear those to this day when they do
hmm,
those pilgrimages, yeah.
yeah. And then the
Oh,
pretty maids, in striking contradiction to other interpretations, are thought to be, in this case, the nuns.
right, yeah.
I still like I like the idea that Three Blind Mice and Mary Mary quite contrary, because in the Elizabethan age, uh, Mary the First was really
Demonized.
painted as
Yeah.
being this, yeah, she was demonized completely and like became known as Bloody Mary. I think that the two actually tie really nicely together.
It makes a lot of sense, and I feel like the Protestant church would have had to have done something like that to,
Yeah,
reassert its place and its control. Like, they had to paint her out to be they're creating a whole new religion. They had to paint her out to
I
be like
know.
hellspawn, right? So
Exactly.
interesting. Oh, what is this show? Honestly, I watched. It's so good. It's I think it's called Princess Catherine. And it's actually
Hmm.
like the story of her relationship with Henry. You see Mary when she's a little girl. I never knew that Bloody Mary was her though. I And you got to think about how many times did you go into a bathroom in grade school
I
to do the
know.
Bloody Mary thing? I had no idea you're calling on a
Yeah.
former queen.
All right.
That's
So
wild.
really, really fascinating. And like, yeah, so all of these Mother Goose tales, like you'd never guess or think that there is some
No.
historical tie to it.
Yeah, it's
One that
wild.
also I had no idea about was Humpty Dumpty.
Oh, I
So,
don't know. I know it has something to do with royalty, but what? I don't know.
no,
Oh,
war. Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall. Humpty Dumpty had a great fall. All the king's horses and all the king's men cannot put Humpty Dumpty together again. So, the real Humpty Dumpty was not a person, but a powerful cannon used by royalist forces during the English Civil War from 1642 to 1651.
I just had to take a minute in my mind to be like, a cannon? Like, what's a cannon? I wasn't thinking of the machine. I was there's things in the church called cannons. I don't
Yes,
know where I
yeah.
was going with that, but
No,
an
we're talking
actual
about
like a
an
cannon,
actual like cannon that would be used in war.
cannonball. Yeah. Oh shit.
Yes.
What? Oh, that makes sense. That makes sense.
Sir Charles Lucas and Sir George Lisle led the King's men and overpowered the Parliament stronghold of Colchester in early 1648. And they held on while the parliamentarians led by Thomas Fairfax encircled and besieged the town. And the supporters of Charles almost won the day because of Humpty Dumpty. So, in
Yeah.
pole position, which is on top of a church tower, on top of the church tower of St. Mary at the walls,
Okay.
they put Humpty Dumpty. Okay, so
Okay.
Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall
All right.
on top of this
Okay.
tower.
I get it.
And their gunners managed to like blast away the attacking troops for 11 weeks.
Okay.
But eventually, the top of the church tower was blown off. It was like blown away.
Mm.
And Humpty Dumpty went crashing to the ground
Shit.
where it was buried in a deep marshland. So Humpty Dumpty had a great fall.
Oh my
The
gosh.
king's cavalry, the horses, and the
Yeah.
infantry, men, all the king's horses, all the king's men, hurried to retrieve the cannon, but they couldn't put Humpty back together again. And without their key weapon, they were overrun by Fairfax and his soldiers.
Wow. And then what does that essentially lead to? Does that lead to anything major like in like change on the throne or anything like that? Cuz just asking because
Yeah.
like Humpty Dumpty is always portrayed as like a giant egg with a crown on his head. So I'm like, did they somehow
It's the
conflate like
royalist forces were using that, right?
yeah, so okay. Cuz I thought maybe it like also meant like because of this the king lost or something.
Yeah, so they overpowered the parliamentary strongholds, but
Mhm.
the parliamentarians encircled the town. Basically, like the Humpty Dumpty, the royalist forces
Right.
ended up losing their position.
Okay, I get it.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah,
Crazy. I had no idea that that was a
I
thing.
know.
Yeah.
Um, and then one last one that's kind of sad and very, very short.
Okay.
Jack and Jill went up the hill to fetch a pail of water. Jack fell down and broke his crown, and Jill came tumbling after. Then up Jack got, and off did trot as fast as he could caper to old Dame Bob, who patched his knob with vinegar and brown paper.
Oh, I never knew that last part.
I never knew the second part either. I really had to take a second to read that properly.
Yeah.
So, we all know the first part of Jack and Jill, didn't know really about the second one. We know it's kind of a dark tale, right? Like
Yeah, they
someone
hurt
broke
themselves.
broke his crown. Jill comes tumbling after.
Yeah.
Historians say that this commemorates a love affair between an unmarried couple who regularly met on a hill for romantic trysts.
Get
And
out of
according to the
town.
legend, Jill became pregnant, but Jack died just before the birth of their child. He either fell from a hill or got knocked on his head by a falling rock or something. And in turn, Jill died in childbirth, tumbling after her lover.
No way.
Apparently.
That's not what I thought this was at all. I thought they were
Apparently.
kids, and I thought they were brother and sister.
That's Hansel and Gretel, no?
Well, yeah, Hansel and Gretel are kids, but I don't know, like, when I was growing up hearing Jack or their brother and sister, but when I heard Jack and Jill, I don't know, I think, the pictures always used to depict them as, like, 2 kids going up to get.
Well, sure, because now they're Mother Goose nursery rhymes, but I think that the original
Yeah.
rhyme kind of comes from this, and maybe it was also used as like a cautionary thing of like, no, you shouldn't go off on your own to have your romantic trysts, like that's not okay, you're unwed, nope,
But
get
then
married
what's
out of
the
wedlock,
second part?
don't
Is
have a
it a
baby.
twist because he didn't actually die?
I'm not exactly sure. The second verse apparently was added later. So the original was technically just with the first verse, but then a bunch of other verses were added later. But this is the oldest of the second verses that was added, or the second set of verses that was added. So originally it was just Jack and Jill went up the hill, fetch a pail of water. Jack fell down, broke his crown, and Jill came tumbling after. There's also like other people that like goes into a bunch of others like myths and legends of specific people
Okay.
who like
Let's be honest, there's
but
been
it's
lots of
basically
lovers' trysts through the years. Many, many.
yeah. Yeah, I think that there's it ultimately has to do with some sort of lover's tryst.
Yeah. Maybe that's the backstory to Rapunzel.
Oh god. Yeah. So, I
Roots.
mean, those are the only ones I did. There's so
But those are
many.
the ones that are like the most popular when we're young. When we were young, I don't even know if kids learn these stories anymore. And I don't know if they
I feel
should.
like they do.
They do,
I
eh?
feel like they do. I think it still just like still exists in schoolyards and playgrounds and stuff like that. No
I
one knows what they actually mean anymore. They're just fun rhymes,
I
but
feel dumb. I always thought Bloody Mary was like Mary, like God Mary. And I was like, why are we making her bloody? Like, what's the deal?
you went to a Catholic school, right?
Yeah, that's why I thought that.
Yeah, exactly.
It made sense, kind of. But
Yeah.
nobody actually knew. I don't even know. Yeah, you're right. Like when that whole Bloody Mary thing was happening in my school, girls were obsessed with it. And like I don't know how any of us ever heard about that because it's there was no stories, there was no movies about it. Like they've made horror movies about that since, but not when I was growing up in the 90s and early 2000s. So I don't
Hmm,
even that was like literally passed down through the school yard, like what you're saying. So
interesting.
I wonder if that still exists today.
I don't know.
I wonder if that exists in a French version as well. Because I think a lot of these
Maybe.
stories are very like English centric mostly.
Yes.
But
Yeah,
then
I
but
think a lot of the
then
Mother Goose
Charles
stuff is.
Perrault made this like uh first nursery rhyme book. So that's so interesting. That's so cool.
Oh, there's also one more theory about Jack and Jill actually.
What?
That it has to do with a tax measure by King Charles the First, specifically on beer. Um, specifically reducing the volume but maintaining the cost in a jack, which was like an eighth of a pint,
Mm.
and a Jill, which is a quarter of the pint that came tumbling after. I don't know. There's lots of theories. I like the love story. I feel like that actually makes more sense.
It
But
does.
what
I
the
think
hell
it
do I
makes more
know?
sense. But like I said, a lot of these do sound like a drunk guy in a pub made them up. So the beer thing could track as well. People were
Yeah.
really into beer in Europe a long time ago. Like you said in
Well, it
a
was safer to
previous
drink than
I
water.
was just gonna say, like you said in a previous episode, it was safer to drink than water, and that's a fact. That really was a real thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that that's where we'll wrap it up here. There's so many more real story behind Mother Goose tales that you could look into, but those are just some of the ones that I chose.
Can
And I
I
think I like the ones on Mary the most. Yeah.
can I ask the random question? A random question: is the woman who lived in the shoe part of that nursery rhymes? I just remember that story,
Um,
but I can't place if it's part of the
I think
nursery.
so.
Yeah, because I thought it
Yeah.
was. Okay.
Yeah.
Anyways,
Yeah.
just random aside. Yeah, I really like the ones about me. Obviously, you saw me. I was about to be like, Catherine, 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 because I just recently got super obsessed with her. Oh, King Henry, he was a bad guy. He was a nasty
Yeah.
dude, psychopath. I think they're
Yeah.
doing a new movie about him, though. Actually,
Probably.
yeah.
Yeah, he's an interesting person. So, different from our regular fairy tale
But not
episodes,
really, like,
but
in a way, but it's shorter
just like,
stories, but the
yeah,
backstories are still, like, in line,
elaborate.
actually.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah.
So
Mhm.
we'll
Very
wrap it up
cool.
here for today. As
Okay.
always, you can follow on Instagram, Allegory Story Podcast, or send us an email at allegorystorypodcast@gmail.
Point
And we'll
com.
see you. Oh, yeah, .com. And
You
we'll
guys
see you
know
next
that. We don't
time.
need to tell you that. We'll see you soon.